Hi everyone, and welcome to Perilous Prose. I'm Sheena and I've got another video for you today. Since it's January and everyone is working on their resolutions and their reading goals for the year, I thought that I would take a minute and talk about some ways to increase the number of books that you read each year, or at least to make better use of the time that you spend reading. So I've got 3 tips for you, and I'll go ahead and start right in on that. My first tip is to know your learning style. So do you learn best by hearing things, by watching them, or by doing things? Because that's all going to affect which way you take information in best. And of course, we're all kind of visual learners, that's why we like to read. But I know that there are some books that I take in better in audio format, and there are others that I prefer to have a physical copy of so I can put in my annotations with my post-it notes. So knowing what way you take that information in is going to affect the types of books that you gravitate toward in terms of format, and knowing which format works best for you for different types of books is going to be very important, because my next tip is to diversify your formats. So I use all 3 formats. I do audiobooks, ebooks, and physical books, but I read different types of things on each one. For audiobooks, I tend to go more for classics and for nonfiction because it's easier. I listen to a lot of audiobooks when I'm working or doing other things, so if I happen to check out for a couple of seconds, it's easier to come back if I miss something. And it's with the nonfiction, it's kind of like listening to a lecture, like when I was back in school. So that helps me absorb certain types of information better with the nonfiction, but there's still some that I prefer to go back if it's a denser text and have the physical book that I can annotate. Now for fiction, I don't really like listening to that on audio. I prefer to have something that I can eye read because it's much easier to pick up on plot devices and things that happen in the text that way, where you have to pay attention to every sentence because your killer might be leaving clues for you, or there might be some kind of foreshadowing that's happening. So for fiction, I prefer those 2 formats. And then another note on audiobooks is with the nonfiction and the classics, I usually speed up the reading on that. So instead of listening to it at the standard speed, I usually bump it up to 1.25 or 1.5. I haven't gotten up to 2 times speed yet. But that way it flows better with my brain. I always had trouble when we read aloud in school because the reader was always so much slower. I could read 2 or 3 pages ahead. And so if I speed up the narration, then the speed of the words matches the speed of my thought, and then it's easier for me to pay attention. My third tip kind of goes along with that. It's to take advantage of those different types of formats. If you've got audiobooks, you can do that while you're doing something else. Like I said, I listen to mine a lot when I'm at work. I do a lot of data entry type stuff. So I can listen to that and it doesn't affect what I'm doing on my computer, and I've taken in a lot of audiobooks that way. For ebooks, I like to read those on my phone, and I always have my Kindle with me. So while I'm making phone calls at work and I'm listening to the endless rings and that same voicemail message that every phone comes with, then I'll be reading that, and usually if I'm making about 20 phone calls, I can get through 3 or 4 pages that way on the phone. And then my Kindle, I read that while I'm waiting for the car to warm up, or if I'm waiting in line, anytime that I just have a little bit of downtime. And then I keep the physical books at home. They really don't travel with me anymore just because I don't want them to get damaged or lost or anything. And now that I'm annotating my books, having the physical copy at home is good because then I don't lose my little flags. Okay, and then I've just got a couple of other sort of random suggestions. First of all, I always ditch books at the 1/3 point if I'm not enjoying it. I mean, life is just too short to spend reading bad books. So if I'm not enjoying it, I give it about 1/3 and then I ditch it if it's no good. I've broken that a little bit lately. I've powered through a couple of books, but they were pretty light reads, so I was able to get through them pretty quickly anyways. I also balance the type of books that I'm reading, so I go back and forth between fiction, nonfiction, contemporary classics, all that stuff. And that way, just depending on what mood I'm in, I've got something that I can go to. If I've got a series, I tend to go through it bit by bit. So I might read like the first book and then the second book and then read something else and then go back to the third book. So I just like to shake it up a little bit, but I also tend to keep groups of books together. That's something that I'm trying new in 2016. So like in January, I'm trying to read mostly historical American fiction. I'm not doing that for every book, but I'm kind of grouping them together, and I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. One, so I can keep up my reading momentum, and number two, so that it doesn't distract from the stuff that I'm writing. Because if I'm, writing something that's historical fiction and I end up reading a really good contemporary fiction novel, then I'm like, ooh, I want to write something that's like that now, and then I get distracted from my project and I abandon it. So I'm trying to group everything together so that way I can stay in the same headspace. And my last one is to take advantage of your library, because if you've got a deadline that you're working on, that's going to make it a little bit easier to get through books, especially if they're a bit denser. If it's just like something you're reading for fun, sometimes it's hard to kind of keep going on it, but if you have that deadline, then you know, okay, I've got so many days left that I need to get through this. So those are my tips for reading a bit more in 2016. If you've got any suggestions of your own, or if you have any questions, leave a comment down below. And I will link all of my social media down below as well. And I'll see you guys next Saturday. Thanks. Bye.